It's no secret that in the last few months, trans identity has gotten to be a bit scary. People kind of scared to express pro-trans politics. And I think a large part of this is the fact that we've seen a very hard shift to the right in our broad culture as of late. I think a lot of people, maybe even the same amount of people, if not more, are still just as pro-trans as they used to be. But times have changed, and they feel less safe expressing those opinions, and they keep them concealed to some extent. Obviously, if this is happening, if a lot more trans people, especially trans youth, are staying in the closet, there's a much higher likelihood that we're going to see less trans youth represented in data, studies, surveys, any kind of points you try to point to say, oh, look, we have actual inscrutable data. Very similar to left-handedness. When it was outlawed or heavily discriminated against, you saw significantly less students in schools, kids in schools who were left-handed. This is a very famous study, and this comparison is nothing new. However, the fact that transness has gotten increasingly less acceptable, and that the right has cracked down on transness using their unilateral power they've been given, there has been a statistical decrease, supposedly, in the amount of young Gen Z people who either identify as trans or identify as pro-trans rights. And who else would bring this to our attention, not as a point of concern that we should be worried about, but as a point to brag about, as if declaring victory, than Blaire White, one of the most evil content creators on this platform. Now, if I listed all of the reasons why, I would probably get stun-locked forever, but I will say when she edited that article to screenshot it in order to claim that trans women couldn't get cervical cancer, when in reality the article said that trans women who have gotten bottom surgery should regularly get checked for cervical cancer because they can get it, but that didn't fit her narrative, so she edited the Canadian Cancer Society article, then screenshotted it to use in her video to make it seem like she had evidence to back up her claim. When she's that level of intentionally evil, I don't feel like I need to list any more reasons. That's just so blatant. I hate her. I'm gonna be straight up. I hate her. I hate her, and I hate her face. Look at this. Look at this. I am so glad that the right-wing woman with a lot of plastic surgery to the point where she looks like some kind of alien or like a reptile wearing a human skin suit. I'm so glad that this aesthetic is finally starting to be parodied and made fun of by people. Just jibbing. That sounds racist. That sounds like a racist term. Did I accidentally say a slur there? Like jabbing at the right. I'm so glad to see that this aesthetic is now being made fun of. The whole Skeletor cheekbone thing, the buccal fat removal. Oh my god. Okay, as much shit as I want to give her, okay? There is someone in the right-wing sphere with plastic surgery so bad, it doesn't seem real. I only just a few days ago saw a tweet with a screenshot of her, and I could not believe my eyes. I thought I was going to have nightmares. I had to stay up. I couldn't go straight to bed after seeing this. Who here has seen Lara Trump's eye sockets? Let me show you if you haven't seen them. Viewer discretion advised. Listen, guys, I'm warning you. This does not look good. Now, at first glance, you might be thinking, Zan, what's the big deal here? But then you look at the top of her eyes and you realize, and I promise you it's not eyeshadow. There's multiple images, her with and without makeup. She got some kind of surgery to remove, like, the fat on the brow, I guess. And it's so extreme that now her eye socket sinks in and creates a crevice, and then the eyeball comes out. Plastic surgery is getting crazy, bro. Like, she always had somewhat prominent features in that way, but dude, the plastic surgery made it look her skin looks vacuum sealed to her skull. Exactly. At least Blaire White isn't looking this terrible, okay? We can give her a lot of crap, and we will, but she isn't off that bad. All that said, though, I think it's time that we got into this video. She called it Gen Z is ditching trans ideology. That's right, apparently Gen Z is abandoning wokeness and pro-transness. They've won over Gen Z. They are declaring victory. Let's see how long their actions continue to back up that claim, considering supposedly now they've won on this front. Gen Z is not pro-trans, so what's the point in making any more anti-trans content? This is a level of pretentiousness that is unimaginable, by the way. She has a jar on her desk that says Blaire White was right, heart. And she puts $1 in there. Or no, are those hundreds? I think those are hundreds. She puts $100 in there every time she, I guess, claims to have been right about something. I'm guessing she's going to put $100 in there in a moment, right? I assume that's what she's going to do. Anyway, mind you, hilariously, this is a woman who literally fled Texas back to California as the laws there got more anti-trans because she is not down to live under the leadership that she advocates for. She just wants to make money off of these idiots, not actually have to suffer because of these idiots. So keep that in mind if you're a Blaire White fan. Like, this woman moved to California to get away from Texas because the policy that she advocates for is so overwhelmingly present in Texas. Anyway, if you end up enjoying this video, then please consider leaving a like on it. It really does help out a lot. Seriously, the algorithm hates me because I'm a progressive and I'm awesome and based and tell the truth all the time, so leaving a like really does help to fight against the demons that are trying to hold me back from success. Consider subscribing and ringing the bell icon to turn on all notifications so that YouTube actually tells you when I go live or upload a new video and I don't get dragged away by Amazon and forced to work in a warehouse for a living, because I don't want to have to piss in those bottles. Anyway, folks, thank you for your support. Like, comment, hype, all that good stuff. Let's get into it.
I hate to say I told you so, but I also kind of love it.
Oh, she's doing the thing.
I feel like I'm doing a lot of these videos this year. These just like I told you so videos. And not to come across as arrogant or whatever, I just believe in the truth and I believe the truth matters. And so if you're ever vindicated when you were right, especially when you were fighting against a sea of demons, ogres, and big backs who were threatening your life and hate.
For those that don't know, big back means fat. More or less, Blaire White is the mean girl, okay? Her channel blew up really big because she was the biggest trans creator in a time when being trans and a YouTuber with any kind of platform was really unusual, very rare, and so she kind of defaulted into being YouTube's biggest trans creator, and has maintained that label for quite some time. I think there might be some that are bigger than her now, but she's really up there, right? And so her entire brand is to be a mean girl, or I guess mean woman. She's well into her like 30s, probably getting towards her 40s now, but her whole thing is just being mean. She started out just grandfathered in as the trans YouTuber, and then she moved on to doing right-wing anti-trans content, and that started to blow her up a bit, but she really got big when she started commentating on the tea community. Most of you guys won't remember this, because I don't think it's even around anymore. I never hear anyone talking about it, but the tea community was this, like, sort of girl boss, like, drama thing. I don't even know how to describe it. It was an era of the internet I can't describe. It had a lot to do with the makeup and beauty products industry and community on YouTube. Not my forte, but she tapped into that audience and blew up big time. And then, because of sort of the combination of different viewpoints and ideas and preferences her very bizarrely diverse, in a way, audience had, she realized that what her fans really want is cruelty, meanness, primarily focused on attacking people's appearance. And so Blaire White, someone who is so insecure, she has had an immense amount of work done beyond just transitioning, is attacking other people's appearance as if we can't tell that this is blatant projection. Like, clearly she is extremely self-conscious and very insecure, and that's why 90% of what she has to say about people are that they're ugly, and that's why they're wrong. Because correct people are never ugly, truth tellers are never ugly, beautiful people are the people you should trust and always tell the truth. Obviously, that's just logic.
Hating you for years and saying horrific things about you because you had the audacity to speak the truth. I believe you deserve a quick moment to just be like, told you so. So this is my told you so. Trans has absolutely become.
Nothing says speaking the truth like editing documents and articles to try and make up claims or make up evidence to back up your claims. I still remember that Canadian Cancer Society thing. That shit was so crazy.
A trend. Why are fewer young people identifying as trans? This is, there's a lot of articles coming out this week. You may have seen these sorts of headlines because there's new data. The numbers are in, and it's, you don't need the numbers if you've been subscribed to Blaire White for the past decade. You don't need the numbers if you're part of the Blaire White army, because you just saw it coming, because we saw it coming. But a surprising shift is taking place in the gender and sexual identities of young Americans. The Center for Heterodox Social...
Now, assuming that everything was continuing on as normal right now, I would be like, maybe there is some actual merit to the idea that being trans or gender dysphoria is sort of a socially ingrained thing, or a kind of phase, something that might just pass on its own if you just leave it alone for a while. But the fact that there has been a very concerted multi-year effort now to demonize trans people as predators, advocating for their murder and slaughter and imprisonment, like very openly trying to make being trans illegal, right? Of course you're going to see a massive drop in people publicly identifying as trans. The same stat directly correlates to left-handedness. For a long time, being left-handed and a student in America was not exactly smiled upon. And of course, what ended up eventually happening is we stopped being so backwards, and within a decade, we saw a very strong rise in the amount of students that were left-handed until it just flatlined. Like, it just stabilized at the number of left-handed people there are roughly in society. Exactly what you'd expect, as we now know today, because it's been decades since then, the number has been consistent. So, clearly, when you have laws and policy and even just social stigma, it doesn't even need to be laws and policy, it can just be a social stigma. When that is suggesting, maybe let's not be open about being trans, people are not going to be open about being trans, okay? All it takes is being stigmatized against socially, and a lot of people will stay in the closet. That's all it takes. And there's way more than that happening right now, let me tell you.
Science says that since 2023, both trans and queer identification have dropped sharply within Gen Z. So here's...
Zan, the word trans is shadow banned on YouTube chats. On my phone, it shows my message, but on the computer where I'm listening, it's not showing my message. Well, I saw Tuesday's message saying trans. I wouldn't be surprised if YouTube's doing that thing there again, where they literally deboost any content with tags or metadata that references homosexuality or being LGBTQ. They did that for a while and got called out and had to change it, but I bet they've probably gone back to that.
The graph, as you can see. So we're looking at between the end of 2019 and 2020. I wonder what happened then. Nothing much, right?
Between the end of 2019 and 2020. So this is when transness started to go up. So clearly 2019 is the year when like BreadTube started to get big. We saw a lot more of like a rise in progressive just media in general. A lot more people just seem to be expressing progressive opinions across the board. But yeah, obviously we saw a pretty consistent rise. And then what happened in 2023? Well, it was post-midterms where we saw all these Republicans who won hard in red states starting to implement really harsh anti-trans policy. I've been covering this shit since it happened. This was post-midterms, right? Things got really rough. And then going into 2024, Trump gets elected, and now the nation, the federal government, is in favor of those anti-trans policies. Of course people are going in the closet. I cannot wait for when Blaire White complains about the numbers spiking back up again in the future. This is like the situation where they're setting them up for here. Okay, being trans, it's a temporary social trend, right? And now the trend is dying, right? So once it's no longer all but illegal to be trans, does that mean the numbers aren't going to spike back up to where they were? If I see them complaining about the numbers spiking back up, I'm going to ask, why does it seem that identifying as trans correlates directly with how much or how little discriminated against they are? You gotta ask that question.
There is this huge spike, and it starts going up, all the way until you get to 2023, which definitely, according to my own just like recollection, did feel like it peaked in 2023. Like, this graph feels right because it just matches my experience and what I've seen as someone who covers this, obviously, a lot.
Vibes. Good. Very good for my political commentator, going off of vibes. That's what I want.
So In 23, almost 10% of young people in schools were identifying as trans or non-binary. Now, I have a lot of empathy for Gen Z. Well, first of all, let's get to the positive. It is now dipping all the way down. 2025, it's nearly half, but it's only to about what it was in 2021. So still some work to do. However, I have a lot of empathy for Gen Z, like I was about to say. This is a generation.
Still some work to do. You gotta shove those trans people back in the closet. This is a woman who's cried on camera about how she knew she was trans from the age of 4 years old, and literally goes through her life constantly seeking out surgeries to make herself more womanly. Like, I don't know how someone more soulless than her could exist. The blatant hypocrisy. The fact that, like, what I really like that one woman, what was her, Blaire White or something like that? Carolyn Whitsky or something like that? She was this crazy white nationalist lady. Not like crazy Nazi. Blaire White was on a panel show with her, and they were trying to get along. Like, Blaire White doesn't want to fight with any Nazis or far-right figures. She wants unity with them, right? And so she's trying her best to do the I'm one of the good ones. Hold on, you don't realize I'm one of the good ones. Ma'am, please, I don't think you understand. I am really one of the good ones. Because this lady is just going hard on Blaire, telling her she'd be better off if she just grew her mustache out, telling her, like, why don't you go molest a kid? Like, just going hard on Blaire. And Blaire's response is just begging, pleading for her to realize that she's one of the good ones. She's like, no, I'm really against kids being trans. I literally have made thousands of videos about kids not being allowed to be trans, that being bad. I'm not pro transitioning kids. I literally do everything possible to meet the ideals of what a woman is. I'm not like one of those other trans people who doesn't put any effort into looking like a woman. Like, she's trying her best to appeal to a sense of humanity in this person that doesn't exist. And I loved that. Ever since, Blaire has very much avoided any, other types of collaborations with more right-wing figures such as Lauren Whitsky. But I still love that clip. It really does speak volumes about what this kind of person actually experiences on a daily basis.
That was denied things like prom, denied graduations, really important milestones in becoming a young adult. And so I always knew, like, it would have to be turned around, this and many other things that were afflicting Gen Z. The way that a pandemic turned people trans needs to be studied.
Okay. I love how ever since COVID, for one, all of these people during COVID were saying, for starters, originally, there is no COVID. There is no pandemic. It's the plandemic, or it's the fake demic. It's the beer bug. They had all sorts of names for it on how it wasn't real. It was just a made-up thing. People were freaking out for nothing. And then it became the plandemic, where it was somehow orchestrated by the left and Democrats to shut down the economy and make Trump look bad. And then it was the China virus, because it supposedly broke out from China and infected the US, and that's where it supposedly came from. And then now we're looking back. Now they admit it was a pandemic, but that the lockdowns, the non-existent quarantines we had here in America, mind you, there were no quarantines or lockdowns in America. Nothing real. These people pretend as though we had serious, real lockdowns and quarantines in America like they did in Europe and like New Zealand. And then they talk about it like COVID changed us. The pandemic changed us. It made people trans. It made people depressed. It fucked over so many people. And there's an element of truth to that, which is what the sort of scapegoating is preying upon. The idea that, like, every problem that you want to just scapegoat as being the pandemic's fault, you can.
You guys already know how broken the media landscape is right now. Between misinformation, censorship, and the constant lack of transparency, it is borderline impossible to trust anything you're reading or seeing. And that is exactly—
Oh God, are we about to get the grift sponsor? Maybe I should start taking sponsors. Maybe I should. Should I finally give in? And make a livable income while sacrificing a little bit of my principles? Because, goddamn. The
rest of the video.
It's too bad, Daria. I always kind of felt you understood the way I think.
When you
like,
watch
I know
your
nothing
old
in the
friends
history books is going to be
detransition
true
one
or
by
valid
one.
about the COVID years.
Do we know the context of this post, by the way? Like, do we know for a fact that these people detransitioned because they don't see themselves as trans? Do we think that maybe there are factors happening right now politically that are making people not want to identify as trans publicly? Just curious.
Like, I know nothing in the history books is going to be true or valid about the COVID years and what happened. It's all going to be fabrications, lies, fairy tales, and fantasies. However,
that sounds reasonable.
Like, this needs to be part of the
That's something a reasonable person would say, and not someone who's trying to grift and push an agenda.
Conversation amongst the people. Like, how did a pandemic turn people trans?
It didn't.
Like, how does that happen?
It didn't.
And make no mistake, despite it sounding like a crazy sentence,
it is.
It's what happened. Crazy doesn't mean wrong. There's now this discourse on TikTok from people talking about what actually happened in 2020. What happened during the pandemic when everyone thought they were trans?
Crazy doesn't mean wrong. I gotta make sure to add that to the thumbnail of this video when it goes out on YouTube. Crazy doesn't mean wrong. Oh my god. A quote like that should follow her to her grave, dude. That's crazy.
And non-binary.
Which is apparently not wrong.
And the videos are just very airheaded, like everybody's still clearly asleep, so we'll have to correct them, but here's one.
And what happened in 2020? More specifically, why was everyone becoming queer? And I think I have the answer to that. First of all, you weren't becoming queer, you were coming to know what it meant to be queer, and coming to realize that that might have been you. But to grasp this phenomenon, I feel like it'll be easier to define what being queer actually is. I sort of see queerness as
I don't really care. To say you're missing the point would be
that's good. So all of these videos, or at least some of them even, are going to make coherent arguments. Notice how this woman was clearly about to make a coherent argument, but right before she could actually start making the argument, it gets cut off by Blaire. She's like, I don't care. Because this is going to be a video not focused on debunking any claims or making any arguments. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the data that Blaire is pulling from here is highly contested and likely not even accurate. Regardless, though, her goal is just to focus the entire video on attacking these people's appearances and making a victory lap over defeating transness as a trans person.
Understatement, because if people were just discovering that they were in fact these things, you wouldn't see the drop-off rate that we're seeing now with this new data. So obviously, this is just incorrect. The truth is, the reason why people became trans during the pandemic, non-binary, they, thems, whatever, is the same reason why a lot of weird stuff went on during the pandemic. It's the same reason why people were following nonsensical
rules. There it is.
That
I swear I didn't pre-watch. I've been seeing this shit all over the place. The grifters are now trying to use the fact the pandemic happened to blame everybody's personal problems. I feel like it's part of their cope over the fact that their guy is in power. Like, literally no Democrats are in power in such a way right now that they can do anything to America that they could complain about. And yet they're still trying to blame the Democrats for problems because now it's the Republicans leading things for over a year now, and none of the problems are solved. Things are worse than ever right now, and Trump's in charge. So how do they more or less distract you from that fact and make you feel as though things are going well, we're winning? They point to how bad something that happened 4 years ago, not even under Biden, by the way, it was under Trump, but of course, because Biden inherited COVID, he gets a lot of the memory hold credit for it. And she blames Biden. Biden's lockdowns caused all these problems in people. Are you socially awkward and can't get a girlfriend because you're 14 years old? That's because when you were 10, you were going through the lockdowns, you know? I do think that the COVID lockdowns are going to be one of those things that a ton of young people are tricked by grifters like Blaire White into believing ruined their lives, and it was the Democrats' faults. It screwed them up before they even, had a chance. And then they're going to get older and they're going to realize blaming all their problems on a year and a half stint of a pandemic is kind of cringe. I hope that day comes sooner than later.
Knew somewhere deep down in their subconscious, didn't make any sense, but we're so scared and just did it anyways. It was that hypnosis, right? It was that mass formation psychosis. It was the fact that, according to neuroscience, this is science, when a trauma occurs in someone's life, their suggestibility skyrockets. So when something terrible happens, which is this pandemic, and this, for me, it was less about the pandemic.
When trauma happens, their suggestibility skyrockets. Is that true? Let's Google that claim. You know what? Let's do a little bit of a fact check. Okay, that does seem like it's backed up by a university. I'll assume this is a university, even though it doesn't have... Okay, yeah, this one is. .edu, there we go. So suggestibility is influenced by several individual and contextual factors. One factor that may increase the risk of suggestibility is a history of trauma. I will point out that one factor that may increase the risk of suggestibility as a history of trauma is not exactly, I don't think, in line with the way that Blaire said it, which is, it is proven that everybody knows that suggestibility is increased by trauma. It's like, I don't think that's what that said, but I guess most of her audience isn't going to make that big of a distinction.
Pandemic being scary and more about that mass formation psychosis, like I said, people's behavior, the way people were becoming insane. That was what scared me. I actually had a few breakdowns about it during it. I remember going one time to the Grove in LA and seeing like a baby in a stroller with a mask on, and I just lost it. I like started.
These people literally believe you are a bad person if you wore a mask, by the way. If you had your kids or your baby, like, wear a mask during the pandemic, they think you're a bad person, a child abuser who should have your kids be taken away and be sent to prison. Like, they have made it a moral position that you fail so poorly, you ought to be imprisoned and executed, death penalty, if you believe in science. All the while, they virtue signal about how they're the ones in favor of science. It's the delusional left that's against it, but also, masks don't work. We just make those PPE, personal protective equipment masks. We just make those for fun, you know? Billions or whatever, of those microfiber masks, those N95 masks, those things being in every single hospital in massive numbers. Yeah, we just do that for fun. They don't actually do anything. They don't really work, you know? They don't keep anyone from getting sick. They don't even stop a little bit of spit or snot or other particulates coming from someone's cough or sneeze from getting to other people. Totally no effect at all. And if you think I'm being hyperbolic or sarcastic right now, I need you to understand that is 100% unironically what conservatives believe. They simultaneously believe that it is child abuse because the baby has a hard time breathing if you put them in a mask, like a toddler in a mask in public during COVID. But they also believe that the fibers are not close enough together to stop any actual particulates from getting into your airway. Any. At all.
Crying in public. I went home. I was like, I don't know what's going on right now. But anyways,
she started crying in public because she started crying in public because she saw a parent who doesn't want their baby to get sick.
Stability state of the post-trauma. People were then on their phones or trapped at home. You gotta remember, there's a lot of people who never questioned who they were in their life. A lot of y'all are walking around, no idea who you are. A lot of y'all are walking around, never questioned why you do the certain things that you do. And for the first time, people had that space and that like time to do that. And
I just realized me and Blaire have the exact same microphone. Okay, Blaire, should they then listen to you about who they are? Because the whole trans movement thing was very, very clearly about, like, loving who you are, accepting who you are, being willing to have the hard sit down and think sessions about your identity and figure out whether or not maybe you are different from everybody else, which that alone might be a realization that's hard for a lot of people to swallow. Could take years and years of people figuring that out. I will say, there's a good chance that maybe there was a non-organic spike in the amount of people identifying as trans. Young people are somewhat impressionable, and I could imagine there are some false positives in the case of trans identity, but statistically, that has always been represented. We've always been able to identify the people who desist. There's always been a desistance rate. It's around like 2 to 10%, I think, depending on the age bracket when one started identifying as trans. Usually the older they start identifying as trans, especially post-13, it's like really low, the chances of desistance. And in the cases where desistance happens, even then, it's at a very high rate, reportedly, due to their not receiving any support from family, friends, and broader society, or even feeling outright, attacked.
They're getting fed with, trans content on TikTok. Social contagion. 1 + 1 = 2. So you have this gap in people where they're just looking for answers because the world outside of their four walls.
This is a level of audacity. I guess this is where the right is right now. Take a progressive person's video, cut them off right before they make their argument, mute them, play their video as they argue their point, and then respond to a made-up point that they didn't make because we don't know what point they made because you didn't let us hear it. Just making up a position they supposedly hold.
Of their home is no longer making sense. They take that data in, and on that kind of a level, it could have been anything. It could have been any trend, but it just so happens it was this really destructive one. And it's so crazy how, I don't know how many red flags we even needed for people to see that it was a trend. As soon as you saw celebrities jumping on the bandwagon, how could it be anything but a trend?
As soon as I saw celebrities breathing air, I knew that breathing oxygen was just a trend.
You got Trisha
Paytas?
You got someone like Trisha Paytas.
Of course. If you don't know, very personal, close personal beef between those two. This is not like Trisha Paytas is a large public figure. This is a Blaire White taking every opportunity to go after Trisha Paytas.
Well, I consider myself a transgender male, and I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the correct terminology for people. I'm not a spokesperson for the community. It's just who I am.
Maybe that's a hint that it's a trend. As soon as you have all the pop stars, right?
Does Blaire White believe she's the only trans person or something?
Demi Lovato. You know what I mean? I feel like the writing was on the wall a little bit. And mind you, I'm coming here telling you this as a transsexual myself. So it's not that trans in its totality is a trend. And this is the nuance that libs and defenders of
oh shit, guys, we're getting some nuance from Blaire White. Get ready.
Of the trans trend just can't really get there mentally. Is that when someone says trans is a trend, does that mean that every single person who is trans is following a trend? Obviously not, especially if you transition before the trend.
Just most of them.
Which, notice,
where is the trend now? Because Blaire White has been making videos claiming it's a trend since way before 2019, way before COVID, way before BreadTube, way before ContraPoints got big. Blaire White's career on YouTube has gone back to like 2013, 2014 with these people claiming that transness is just a trend. And year on year, trans identifying youth, the stat increases as transness was getting more and more accepted, and they would complain about it being a trend. Ironically, though, I've noticed this is a very common trend among conservatives, is to claim things that even individuals such as Blaire White have been complaining about and making a career off of grifting, talking about for a decade. They'll talk about it like it's a thing that just started 3, 4, 5 years ago, and it's like, what do you mean wokeness started in 2020? Are you just trying to pander to like the current audience of people watching political content who think politics started in 2020 because it did for them? Like, is that what you're doing? Because you were making videos like this in 2014, Blaire. I see this all the time. I can't be the only one who's noticed.
I'm not seeing the same level of like detransitioners and people who transitioned before the trend as I am after. And a lot of these people are children. A lot of these people are babies. Adults don't know who they are. How can we expect children to? Which reminds.
Oh shit! So adults can't decide to be trans anymore. Ah man, that's crazy. Remember how it used to be? How could you accept the transness of a kid? Kids think they can be dinosaurs. Now adults can't even know if they're trans because adults don't even know who they are.
Reminds me of a very poignant clip. This video might just be thrown back to all my Blaire White was right moments. The Jubilee debate. Just watch this. The idea that a child can consent to a sex change, to gender-affirming surgery, if you believe that, there's really nothing that you can believe they can't consent to, right?
I don't think a child being able to consent to having their appendix removed is the same as what you're implying them consenting to, Blaire. Also, no one is arguing that children should be getting bottom or top surgery or any kind of facial feminization surgery. Blaire transitioned as a teenager, by the way, I think using a lot of under-the-counter, like, back alley kind of methods before this shit was as known and as regulated. So she's benefited from all the things she's demonizing now. She's a very kick-the-ladder-down-behind-you kind of bitch. But what's ironic about this is she's strawmanning right now. The overwhelming majority of pro-trans people do not want trans kids transitioning, and they've done this very deliberately. They want normies, when they think of transition or trans or being trans, they want them to think of that as necessarily requiring top and bottom surgery. That is why they so frequently bring that up. The most extreme case that they could possibly manufacture, even though it doesn't happen, that's what they want people thinking of. Because yeah, most people agree, especially on the left, the pro-trans side, even there most people agree that we should not be like giving bottom surgeries to 13-year-olds. And if most left-wingers and most trans people agree, you better believe most normies and conservatives agree with that point. And so she pretends as though the left doesn't believe that and is actually in favor of, as they call it, chopping off kids' dicks or whatever. But the entire idea is based on a claim that I know that you guys know isn't true. Most of you guys watching right now don't think that 13 or 12-year-olds should be getting top or bottom surgery. This is just a made-up straw man of what the left believes. When we talk about kids being trans, we're talking about, like, dressing differently, maybe going by different pronouns, having a different name, social transition, respecting what they say they are. Obviously, you don't proceed to provide hormones or anything like that until a doctor recommends it, which is oftentimes under strict guidelines and standards and procedures on how to prescribe such things and when not they should be taken. It's way more complex with a lot of doctors and scientists involved, not YouTubers like Blaire White.
Because that's pretty extreme.
I trust them, not even myself. I'm a YouTuber. I don't trust myself to know the right position on this. I trust the doctors and scientists. They know way more than some dumb shit YouTuber like myself or Blaire White.
Permanent body modification under the best circumstances. So you want to move aside all the complications, all the things you can't do, the sterilization, not being able to feed your kids. You can even set that aside. Just the permanent body modification. I mean, you have to be so demented to believe that a child fully understands. I heard a few conversations about, well, if the child fully understands, they don't. They don't.
She's arguing, I've heard so many, she's arguing against someone who's not there. Like, this is a panel debate, not one of those trans person versus conservative trans person versus 50 liberal cis people type things. So she is literally just bringing up supposed really common arguments the left makes. So yeah, transness might get a little bit less popular if millions of highly funded people, such as Blaire, are constantly claiming that trans people are predators. That is a possibility.
Because they're children.
But see, the thing is, though, some adults don't even understand what they want to do.
Exactly,
so
so how can a child?
But see, children, wait a minute, let's not underestimate the power of these kids today, okay? They are very much more educated because they have much more resources and access than we did coming up. So let's be very clear about that.
And they can consent. Who else says that?
So I decided to go on Reddit. Horrific statement. Horrific. But I did, and I wanted to see how they were coping with this new data. I heard less people identified as Wiccan when they were burning witches at the stake, proving that Wiccans were just a social contagion. Which is obviously a sarcastic comment, but it's funny you go straight to witch because we know that's what you are.
See, the mean girl T, like the like press on nails tapping the phone screen to make that click 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 noise. Like,
here's the T. This stupid ugly bitch thinks that she can talk bad about me.
Like that's Blaire doesn't make arguments. She makes insults.
That would, of course, mean that we are actually living in a reality where it's the people criticizing the trans movement causing harm and not the people within the movement causing harm, right? See, the people outside the movement aren't actually cutting the minors' breasts off. The people outside of that movement aren't actually sterilizing children. So the harm's coming from within, the call is coming from within. And that's just a really dumb comparison. They don't.
Apparently it's the trans people themselves now sterilizing the children, not any doctors or surgeons or medical professionals. Not only are there not children being sterilized, but if they were, you would think it would be doctors and medical professionals, not the transes doing it, but okay.
Don't want to end up on watch lists.
Yeah, you know what's really funny about this, guys? You know what's really funny about all this? Do you know how many conservative women are against banning circumcision for babies? For those who don't know, being circumcised as a guy means you lose about 75% of the sensation and feeling in the most sensitive part of your body, being the tip of your dick, meaning sex ends up feeling far less good. A lot of guys who don't have their foreskin need lotion or lube to jack off, otherwise they'll hurt themselves, they'll chafe. There are some pretty negative sides to being circumcised. Thankfully, your boy here is uncircumcised, which does mean you have to, I guess, shower more often and clean your shit, but like, duh, that kind of goes without saying. I don't think it's that big of a deal. And I didn't have to have a part of my dick cut off when I was a baby, as many people have. And yet you will never see these conservative women, particularly the cis, straight conservative women, claiming that we should ban circumcision for children. They'll never believe, because they like circumcision. For them, it's an aesthetic preference. A lot of women prefer a circumcised penis to an uncircumcised one. And so you don't see a lot of women calling for it to be banned, and you certainly don't see a lot of conservative women calling for it to be banned, which is ironic because they talk about how being trans is child genital mutilation, and yet they are all okay or in favor of what could much more easily be argued to be child genital mutilation, considering literal fresh out of the womb baby.
I don't know. I just feel like these people really do feel like they live in Nazi Germany. This is really their fairy tale. This is really their fantasy they're living in.
Blaire, you fled Texas to California, the state you've spent the last 5 years complaining about being like the worst place on earth because it's so woke. You moved back there, away from Texas.
And sometimes I wonder if it's a sexual thing. Like, are some people turned on by like role-playing that they live in Nazi Germany? I don't get it. Could it be the social attacking coming back, making them afraid again? Well, I'll say this. If social pressure...
Oh, chat. You can see that there's a reason why Blaire is covering this subreddit. What's the subreddit called again? I'm curious. What's the subreddit called? Blocked and reported. So this is a left-leaning, pro-LGBT subreddit. And if you look, you can see this reply only has 16 upvotes, okay. But this reply, the next one, has -26. Nothing about that comment on that subreddit should have garnered -26 downvotes, or probably more than that, because the post probably actually got a few hundred upvotes, but got enough downvotes to get it down to -26. This tells me this Reddit page, this Reddit thread, was shared around right-wing circles. Blaire found it because of that and decided to make this video. Because there's no way that this was just something she stumbled across, a subreddit about being left-wing and pro-trans, where a pro-trans left-wing post naturally pulled a -26 upvotes. That is not natural. This is a post that clearly got brigaded.
See, Germany. This is really their fairy tale. This is really their fantasy they're living in. And sometimes I wonder if it's a sexual thing. Like, are some people turned on by like role-playing that they live in Nazi Germany? I don't get it. Could it be the social attacking coming back, making them afraid again? Well, I'll say this. If social pressure, social stigma, if people having a negative opinion of you can actually convince you to detransition or to not be who you really are, if that's really who you are, then it wasn't you in the first place.
I'm sorry. If the law is making it threatening, like a threat to be trans, like if the law decides being trans in public around kids is a sex crime punishable by death, like they're trying to make the case in Florida and many other red states, then yeah, people are gonna not identify as trans publicly. She is literally trying to argue there's no such thing as closeted trans or gay people. Doesn't exist. If you were really trans, if you were really gay, you wouldn't go in the closet. You would be out in public all the time. And this is how she knows that any amount of rising data suggesting there's more gay, trans, whatever people must be a trend, because bigotry and closeting don't exist. There is no correlation between those two that exists. It must be a trend when people get less bigoted towards a group and more of them are out publicly.
It wasn't you in the first place. I've faced all of that and more. I've faced people not getting it, and I'm like, what does that have to do with me when it comes to me being trans? So if you can be
because you started transitioning as a teenager, the thing you're demonizing right now. A thing that you do not mention anymore because you've realized how much your audience wants the purely an anti-trans perspective. For a long time, she had to pretend to be reasonable and middle of the road to a degree, despite having a very clear, obvious bias. She tried to maintain plausible deniability. Now, she's had to remove the plausible deniability in order to secure her niche. And so she doesn't even act as though or talk about the fact that she started transitioning at the age where she says kids should not be allowed to transition.
Persuaded by the current, cultural temperature, then that proves the point that you're not really trans. Because if you really were, you would walk that walk. This is a really interesting comment.
Very clever use of words, cultural temperature. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the law. across every red state and the federal government, the right controls everything, and they believe that trans people are demons, that they are predators, and are calling them as such. That is not a little social stigma. That is a quickly escalating path towards transness being made illegal. And Blaire knows that. That's why she's in California, not Texas anymore.
Drops to elementary schools, their older siblings cringe and stop being into it. This happened to my kid. She was all about these labels and wanted pronouns and a new name her first year of middle school. Middle school is scary. The kids are not okay. The kids are not okay. Until the next year when the younger...
Blaire doesn't talk about this, but she said she's known she's trans since she was 4 years old.
Kids were even more into it, and she slowly backed off and complained about how cringe the younger kids were. I've seen this among my kid and her peers. There was a huge movement for it in the last years of primary school, with them all choosing a range of different labels. Now they're all at high school a few years on, that's entirely rejected. And more troublingly, my daughter reports that there's a lot of homophobia about, to the point where they're actually bullying gay and lesbian kids. So that's the pendulum right there, that society has a really tough time just finding that balance point, which is the healing point.
I agree with that, actually. That is a surprisingly cogent point from Blaire White. I can agree with that. It does feel like right now we are in a constantly swinging pendulum, and it's funny how Blaire's entire premise here is that, like, wokeness is destroyed. I think she knows that it's a pendulum, that right now the right is on the, upswing of the pendulum, and the left is on the bottom swing. It's, a few years ago, or 4 years ago, the left was on the upswing. And then, before that, a few years before that, the right was on the upswing during the anti-SJW era, where that was... it's hard to quantify whether that was bigger than this, but I'd say this is bigger. Which leads me to hope, at least, that the next big pendulum swing to the left is going to be bigger than the last one. 2026 is our year. 2026, the year of the woke.
That's where we all heal, is that balance point, where you don't have to convince yourself that you are the other gender yourself, and you also don't have to bully other kids. Like, teach your kids balance, please. This either or, that we have to be that or hate people.
Wait, hold on. Teach your kids balance? I thought it was bad to push any political positions on your kids, huh? Can't push your politics on your kids. You gotta let them figure it out all on their own, I thought. Otherwise, it's brainwashing.
People who are that is, like, really unhealthy. So in the midst of the trend going down, I think that should be the goal, that people are like, just treat it exactly like it is. Something that afflicts a very small amount of people. Keyword people. All people are human beings made in the image of God. All people deserve respect.
Here's her shoehorning a bit in here, like, okay, but don't see me as one of these trenders, okay? I'm one of the real trans people, okay? And we real trans people are a very small proportion of the population. We don't want to bother anybody. So the real transsexuals you can be okay with, but these trenders, they're the bad ones. Mind you, this is a woman who... she's, like, talking about Gen Z as if they are losing interest in being trans, as it's like a dying trend or whatever. Meanwhile, this is a woman who built so much of her brand on bullying underage teenagers and children on social media apps like TikTok, posting about being trans or LGBT, right? Like, she is part of that force sending millions of fans to bully these kids. And she's like, yeah, but if you stay in the closet or hide that you're trans, you were never really trans. No one actually goes in the closet. That's not real.
And also, respect is given and reciprocated. Respect is given and you get it back. I just don't think that's radical. I just really don't. But I'm the radical. There are still a lot of things that have been put into place in the past few years that we've all been in this weird psychosis about gender that are still there. So for instance, California is still a trans sanctuary state.
And you live there now.
There are still laws all across the country that a child can be taken from their parents if their parent doesn't affirm their gender identity. So what about those kids?
Yeah, if it causes the child enough distress that they become suicidal. That's the law, by the way. The law is if the child has a suicide attempt and has to be institutionalized by California law because of said suicide attempt after medical treatment is administered, in the mandatory 3-day holding period for said mental oversight, said child will be interviewed by multiple psychologists and doctors, and if that child indicates that the number one reason, or a big reason why they did that, almost killed themselves, was because they are LGBT and lacked support from their family, then yes, it is very possible CPS can get involved and remove the child from the home, because the child is in a health ward, a mental health ward, due to a suicide attempt that they are saying is due to a lack of good treatment by their parents. Unfortunately, while some people want to just see accepting transness as a difference of opinion, when you are trans, it's whether or not your life and identity, who you are, is respected. You know? And that hits people in a way that if you're not trans, you just can't actually sympathize with. You can empathize, but you can't sympathize. You won't ever really know what it's like. And so, yeah, we have laws around that. And Blaire moved to the state where they have those laws to escape Texas. Don't forget.
Kids now that have permanently altered bodies, permanently sterile bodies.
Who are they? Where?
Have no recourse. Like, there's still people who are going to be detransitioned.
I love this too, by the way. The way Blaire's talking about this reminds me of that one clip of Matt Walsh and Joe Rogan. Here it is. Had to find it on Instagram.
Depends on what. I don't think we have exact numbers, but it's, if we're talking about the drugs, it's, I mean, millions.
You're talking about hormone blockers? Yeah. Millions of kids have been on hormone blockers? Really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on that, but my guess is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah, that would be my guess. That this shouldn't be happening to.
It's a very small number, if that's right.
It says over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers and had a prior gender dysphoria diagnosis.
It says it's kind of undercounted, but that
would be a big undercounting.
Less than 1,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the data that Blaire is pointing to claims that upwards of 10% of Gen Z identified as trans during 2020. I don't believe that chart. I don't know what she's sourcing for that. She doesn't cite it in the description, of course, and she, cuts out any name or any institution that could be labeled on that chart, so we just have the data itself. We just have to believe her that that's not from, like, the Daily Stormer or Breitbart or something. Or, like, Moms Against Transgender Insanity.com or something like that. We'll just have to believe her that came from a source that is not ridiculous. But she certainly didn't want us to know what the source was, and that leaves me a little suspicious.
From this period that have yet to do that. And not only are people in denial of that right now, throughout the entire trend of it, people on, in the pro-trans rights movement on the liberal side have all pretended as if that didn't exist. I want to take it back to this woman named Jamie Reed, who is a whistleblower out of a gender clinic in Missouri, who reported and really blew the lid off of the gender clinic that they were transitioning kids whose pronouns were changing every day, some of them identified as animals, and that several people came back after.
Mind you, pronouns changing every day is being gender fluid. People having multiple pronouns. That's why we have any all in the chat as a label. Plenty of people identify that way. Also, we literally just looked at the data. Less than 1,000 kids in America, or I think globally, per year receive hormone blockers. Hormone blockers is the number one, step to transitioning in any physically impactful way. Before that, it's all growing out your hair, changing your name, going by different pronouns, wearing different clothes, that kind of thing. Maybe getting voice training to try and change your voice up a little bit when you try to. But after that, if you're really committed, then you might go for hormone blockers, which is most commonly prescribed in teenagers. Because the idea of hormone blockers is if you're trans, if you're on the road to being trans, but you're in your mid to late teens, you're going to start going through the wrong puberty without them. Blaire White got hormone blockers. That is why she is as feminine as she is in a lot of particular ways, such as her frame. Her frame is very feminine, very cis woman frame. And the reason for that is that she, at the same age she says kids shouldn't be allowed to, started hormone blockers. She was able to prevent a male puberty through the vast majority of her puberty years. And then once she got old enough, she was, as is procedure, prescribed hormones along with the hormone blockers, estrogen hormones. And she was taking those, and that's what feminized her. And she's been taking estrogen, I think, since she was I think she said since she was 17 or something, maybe 18. But yeah, she knows that this data is not accurate. She knows. And mind you, she's trans too. She's been through so many procedures and through the process so much. If she had any of these experiences herself that she could pull from, she would be naming them. But you know why she's not? Because as much of a soul as Blaire White lacks, she doesn't want to throw her surgeon under the bus. Even if it's a surgeon she's never going to go to again, like her plastic surgeon, her whatever it may be, she doesn't want to throw that specific surgeon under the bus, even though she could make tons of money claiming that they groomed her into becoming trans or something. So for her transition is completely ethical, and she has no horror stories to pull from in her experience of seeking out her transition as to how it's so awful. So she's always pulling from other people's stories because she doesn't want to throw anyone real from her real life under the bus that could call her out for lying about them on the internet.
Surgeries asking for things like to have their breasts put back on, which is like, I don't know. Some of this stuff sounds crazy to even say out loud.
We have created a medical system where we have put all of this on the kids.
Well, there's a incredibly heartbreaking anecdote which you cite, which is the young girl who, you know, asks to have her breasts put back on after double mastectomy. I don't even know what to say about that, but horribly misled.
You realize we have breast implantation procedure as well, right? That's a thing. I won't deny there are cases where people... Oh, look, the Falun Gong propaganda organization. Yes, this is the Epoch Times. It is a far-right propaganda org. It's very possible the story they're referring to is completely made up, but there are cases of desistance. There are even cases of late transition desistance. They're extraordinarily rare because we're talking about a population being, you know, trans people, which is already really small. So... yeah, overall, the idea that there is any significant amount of people who are desisting from transitioning, that it's like worrying or concerning, is not true. But on top of that, let's say it is true. Does that mean we should restrict medical research and education around being trans out of fear that people will mistakenly think they're trans? Because that sounds like a good way to get a lot more people confused.
And, you know, abused, it comes to mind.
It was a failure on so many...
I got married and got divorced, so marriage should be illegal. Exactly, gay nerd.
Individuals going in to allow her to have that surgery. But the thing then that just was such a gut check was on the back end. You have a patient calling within 3 months of surgery, reporting this, and the surgeon couldn't even bother to take the call or call them back.
There's so many lessons to pull out of what's been this trans trend for so long. Not all of them have anything to even do with gender at all. One of the things that I have been thinking about is how it really disproves this whole notion of like all progress is actually progress, that like new things, innovative ideas about people, as long as this whole like forward thinking myth that comes from the left, they really prove that like
the myth of forward thinking.
No, like not all progress is actually progress. Some of the stuff is actually regressive. Some of this stuff is
Please say the regressive left. Please bring that back from 2014. Did you remember how well that worked out the first time? Trying to push the idea that the left were the real racists, the real bigots? Please, get back on that nonsense spiral. We already know how to debunk that one. That's the funny thing. If the right starts horseshoeing back around into their old 2014 to 2016 arguments again, bro, I'm already prepped to deal with all those arguments. I got that shit way in the deep in the memory banks, bro. If she wants to start pulling out that regressive left shit in 2025, be my guest, Blaire. Be my fucking guest.
Like, no, like not all progress is actually progress. Some of the stuff is actually regressive. Some of this stuff is harmful. And just because something is new, there is a new social attitude, it doesn't mean that it is healing something from the past.
Left.
In fact, this new social attitude on trans completely dismantled and destroyed any credibility of the movement of like, and I say movement, of just the group of real transsexuals that existed before it. It also greatly harmed gay people and lesbians. It also greatly harmed women and children. People get confused about why trans was such an integral part of the last election. I would say the last 2 elections, and how it was like this really big deciding factor for people maybe.
It actually wasn't. The number 1 and 2 deciding factors for people were the economy and immigration, with transness at the very bottom. It is actually estimated by many independent groups that conservative campaigns wasted upwards of $100 million on trans campaign attack ads that resulted in no additional votes.
Switching to Republican, and it's because of what it actually
200 million
shows. It shows that the left engages in a lot of mythology about their values, a lot of like lies about how progress is good. Some progress is not good. You can progress in a bad way. This whole false
progress can be bad, apparently. Okay, that's literally progress is bad is the belief of the right. They're conservatives. It's about conserving. Progressives are about progressing.
Dichotomy of one side in the country is pushing people forward and one side is holding people back, that being conservatives. That whole mythology, that lie, was really represented quite well in the trans trend, because it showed you guys don't know what you're doing to be, holding the wheel like this, to be with your foot on the gas, taking us new places. Like, you're not taking us forward, you're dragging us back. One of the lessons out of this is like what humanity is.
Ironically, this is exactly what conservatives have said at every point through history where they've wanted to question the idea of civil rights. They have done this constantly. It's kind of annoying. This idea of, oh, well, things are just going too far. Progress is good, but it's getting too extreme now. Slave owners said this about how, they agreed with some of the beliefs of, like, emancipationists, but there needed to be compromise. There needed to be, territorial borders on where slavery would be practiced and not. There were people who said, I agree with the idea of some people being free, but, we still got to have a compromise and preserve the practice in some areas, that kind of thing. And then, of course, you've got the civil rights era, MLK and Malcolm X and all that. And you've got right-wing conservative white nationalists, like white supremacists, arguing, or even the white moderate, as MLK famously called them in the letter from Birmingham jail in Alabama when he was locked up. He wrote a letter where he talked about the white moderate and how the white moderate, the centrist whiteys who didn't understand that, like, exactly what it was like to be a victim of racial injustice, but still were somewhat sympathetic, though were not sympathetic to their methods of never shutting up about how bad injustice is. He called those people out, saying he would honestly rather be punched in the face by a Klansman than be told by someone who means well and is the white moderate telling him, we're just pushing too far. Some progress is good, but, you're just really pushing the bar now. The more you push, the more the right is going to push back, the more the white supremacists will push back. That argument has always been present at every point in history. And ironically, the people claiming we're progressing too much, now's the point where we need to stop, they always say they were cool with the progress up to that point. But then the very same people will be claiming that the progress up to a future point was okay when they start having another big spike of counterculture fervor.
Capable of. Like, humanity really can go through a, decade of suddenly, out of nowhere, believing that children can undergo sex changes. Like, they can just decide that for a decade and then throw it out and be like, oh my God, what was that? Like, we were in a hate.
How? What is the logic to that?
It really shows just the unpredictability of human nature, the unpredictability of where society can go and how quickly things can just get so twisted and effed up. And I guess we know that from history, but, we've lived through a lot of history in these past few years. Thank you again to Ground News for sponsoring.
Okay. All right, Blaire. Look at that. We finished the whole video. Just knocked it right out of the park. Isn't that great? Blaire is wrong. Gen Z is not ditching trans ideology. If anything, Gen Z will be the transist generation to come into adulthood over the next few years. Because remember, Gen Z is still young. Like, the youngest Gen Zers are currently 13, if my math is correct. And so the oldest, Gen Alpha, are 12. We haven't even begun to see the trends of being trans with Gen Alpha yet. And this is going to be a generation, Gen Alpha, or early Gen Alpha, like the first wave of Gen Alpha, is going to be woke as fuck, dude. Holy hell. Mark my words right now, that Gen Alpha Wave 1, the first 3 years of Gen Alpha are coming into, like, teenage and adulthood are going to be so woke. They're going to come into a time that we're in right now. Super right-wing, super conservative culture. The ones who already just want to go the opposite way are probably going to start gravitating towards the left over the right in a time like this, but a lot of them are going to gravitate right naturally, because that's where all the algorithms and social trends are pushing them to. But I predict is that over the next couple years, we're going to see them age out of that right-wing propaganda that they kind of grew up with as they get older, more experienced with life. I think a lot of them are going to find it to be kind of old and cringe. A lot of them are going to get to be 14, 15, 16 years old and look back at their 13-year-old chuddy self as cringe. That trend has happened before, online, multiple times. Happened to me. And I think it's going to happen again, and I think Gen Alpha is going to take that woke dial and turn it up way past what we thought was the limit. Way past what we Gen Z or unks thought was the limit. Anyway. If you guys enjoyed this segment, you know what to do. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. I really do appreciate it. Hype the video if you can. But as always, thank you for watching.